Admit and own your bias. Game film. Impact on winning and intangibles. And if you change the game. Numbers, the right ones. Longevity and durability. Consistency and peak value. Big game performances. Are you clutch? Accomplishments and awards. Context. All around. And what realm? How many games? How many years? Those are my 10 sports commandments. We need a way to judge players where we can have rational, entertaining, and respectful conversations about athletes in every sport. Tonight, on a special edition of Raw Sports Debate, I'll be presenting my 10 sports commandments. I've kind of formulated this over the years. I was inspired by, the 10 Commandments, and also Notorious B.I.G.'s song, The 10 Crack Commandments. That's what gave me the idea. He died about 25 years ago, and I was like, oh, that's it. And these are my 10. I'm sure other people will have theirs if they ever did this. I'm sure Leslie will opine and have his thoughts on this as well. But these are my 10, and these are the way that when you put two players in front of each other or a group of players, how do I figure out who's best? Well, this is how I do it. So number one, and most important, admit and own your bias up front. After number one, we're going to draw a line. All right. Now we got a group here. Number two, the video and the game film, both in the regular season and the playoffs. Number three, your impact on winning and intangibles. Bonus points if you change the game. Number four, numbers, the right ones. Number five, longevity and durability. Number six, your consistency and your peak value. So your ceiling versus your floor as a player, and also how long you're at the top of your game. Number seven, your big game performances. Regular season and the playoffs, where you clutch. I'm going to stop there. Now, that was 2 through 7. They're all intertwined. There's no one ahead of each other, but it's just those 6 right there are in its own block. Now you got the last 3. 8, accomplishments and awards from all angles. Number 9, context. What team you're on, the organization, the opponents, the era. And last but certainly not least, the realm. Are we talking one game, one series, one full season, 3 years, 5 years, 10, 15, 20? So again, admit and own your bias. The game film, impact on winning and intangibles, and if you change the game. Numbers, the right ones. Longevity and durability. Consistency and peak value. Big game performances. Are you clutch? Accomplishments and awards. Context. All around. And what realm? How many games? How many years? Those are my 10 sports commandments. Number one's in its own tier. 2 through 10, they all matter. But those first 6, the video, the impact, the numbers, the longevity, the consistency, the big games. That's what players are. Their accomplishments, their awards, those are a product of those 6. And the opinion of the media members that vote, which is partially influenced by a national narrative, right or wrong. And then you think about everything that plays into it, the context and the realm are kind of more abstract. Those are my 10. So I'm going to break this out and go one by one here. I'm going to start with number 1, admitting and owning your biases. If you root for a team or if you root for a player, it's very hard to not have some kind of confirmation bias and seeing things through that lens. When you root for a team, right or wrong, you inherit a lot of that team's history, especially if you watched them for decades. It just becomes part of your fanhood, and you see everything through those lenses. You root for, let's say, the New York Giants. You watch the Eagles and Cowboys playing. It's a divisional game. Maybe you don't care, or maybe you root for the standings, but maybe in general you don't care. But if you're, I don't know, Houston Texans fan, you don't care about that game. But the Giants fan watching the Eagles against the Texans, well, now he's rooting for the Texans. He's going to see everything through that Giants lens and root for the Texans. And of course, in a Giant game, hey, we see it through our lens, right or wrong. Now, it's more dicey with players. Now, I'm very unique when it comes to rooting for a player over a team. I've been that way since I was young. And I grew up a Brett Favre fan. I grew up in a Giant household, but a Brett Favre fan. And I knew it was going to come to a head one day. It came to a head in the 2007 season, the 2008 NFC Championship game. And I had to make a decision. Who am I rooting for? My favorite player or my favorite team? And I ended up rooting for my favorite player. Did not go well for me. Went well for the Giants, and they beat the 18-0 Patriots the next week. But I digress. I am, always was, always will be a huge fan of watching Brett Favre play. I root for players because at the end of the day, I've seen too many people root for teams that ended up not fulfilling them. And really, it's just spending time, and you should want to enjoy yourself and be entertained when you're watching a game. And I start ranking Brett Favre of all time. I got to be honest. The guy was a turnover machine. He was a gunslinger. He threw, 17 picks a year, threw some ill-advised interceptions at the worst possible times, and he fumbled a lot and he got sacked a lot. But he was also daring, made throws that most quarterbacks of all time couldn't make, and was uber clutch in a lot of big games as well, on the road against tough defenses. So he had a very high ceiling, very low floor. I can admit that. I could admit, hey, I in a big game, I'm not sure if I'd want him because, hey, it's not as safe. I can admit that, but you got to be able to step outside of who you are as a fan, whether it's a player or a team, and see that. Now, the best example that I could think of is my current favorite player, Russell Wilson, which he isn't too dissimilar to Brett Favre, except for the whole, not throwing interceptions things. But in general, they both make backyard plays, and that's probably what drew me to them, and also their competitiveness. Now, when Russell Wilson played against the Denver Broncos in Super Bowl 48 in a 43-8 curb stomping of Peyton Manning and the Denver Broncos, going into that game, the narrative was about the Seattle Seahawks and the Legion of Boom and Marshawn Lynch and Russell Wilson. Oh yeah, he's along for the ride, going up against Peyton Manning, 55 touchdown passes, NFL record, Denver Broncos. That was the storyline. That was the national narrative there. And the narrative was that Russell Wilson was not a top-tier quarterback. There's still some of that rhetoric today. And when I get defensive about it, it's not because he's my favorite player. It's because it's ridiculous. He was clearly a great player, which the video and the numbers and the competition in that division and with his offensive line, you watch the games, he is on that level. Well, I watched that game with people. One of my great friends. He controlled the clock in the first quarter. They scored 27 points on their first 5 possessions of that game. Field goal, touchdown. Then I think there was a kneel down before half, then a punt, and then touchdown. So I guess 6 possessions. 27 points on 6 possessions. Peyton Manning, well, he had a snap go over his head to start the game. That's a safety, and he threw a pick 6. And he scored 8. So Peyton Manning had 0. Now, Peyton was facing a better defense, sure. But it was very obvious who the best quarterback on the field was. When Joe Montana and the 84 49ers curb stomped Dan Marino in his Wilt Chamberlain season in 1984, did we just say, oh, yeah, but Marino's obviously way better. He's just, he was a better quarterback that day, but he just went against a better defense. No, we didn't make those exceptions. And we don't do that now. Russell Wilson was a better quarterback on that day than Peyton Manning. Yeah, the fact that he didn't have to go against the LOB helped. But Russell Wilson on that day would have done a better job than 0 points against the LOB. He would have had negative points. He wouldn't have scored. Is that what the video showed you? So, on my point of admitting and owning your biases here, people still to this day, and people I watched the game with said, nah, he barely had, he had like 120 yards and no touchdowns, and they had a 29-0 lead. Well, yeah, that's true, but that's because you were trying to confirm your bias going into the game. Fact of the matter is, he was moving the ball down the field, making a lot of third down plays, leading to a field goal, touchdown. And then through touchdowns, well, is it his fault that Peyton Manning couldn't get anything going? Not really. So I saw the game like, hey, Russell played great and should have won the MVP and didn't. And others saw the game as, well, even to this day, he was, he was just along for the ride. Meanwhile, Lynch did nothing that game. And sometimes there were 8 in the box to stop him, but other times there were not. Wilson just made the plays. So that's a rant about my guys, but at the end of the day, I have learned over the years how to admit my bias. Brett Favre is a turnover machine. Russell Wilson is, sometimes risk averse, sometimes runs into bad sacks, and sometimes, the risk aversity, early in games, he won't take shots. And maybe that's a Pete Carroll thing. We'll see in the coming years, because I think he's, again, underrated now. But I can admit what he does wrong, but I'll also defend what he does well because he's my favorite player. But you also have to understand that I'm bluntly honest. I root against other quarterbacks, just like I was saying earlier, a Giant fan's going to root against the Eagles and Cowboys and whatever Washington calls themselves these days. They're going to root against them. Those are rivals. Or even back in the day, the Giants root against the 49ers because they had the big rivalry in the 80s. Cowboys and Niners and Packers. There's a lot of bad blood there. Brady and against Manning, so the Colts and Patriots. I am extremely honest about it. I root against other great quarterbacks. I love watching them play. But I want, for instance, Aaron Rodgers. I love watching Aaron Rodgers play football. But I'm a Brett Favre and a Russell Wilson. Those are my two favorite players I've ever watched to play football. They entertain me. As men, they have their flaws and they have their, things that you can admire about them. But I'm just entertained by them, and I respect them for that. I root against Aaron Rodgers with glee. And people didn't understand that. Like, so you say you love watching him. Why do you root against him? Well, because he's a direct rival to Favre. He's a direct rival to Wilson. And I want my guys to be better all the time than him. That's it. It's gotten to the point where I root against Breeze. Yeah, Roethlisberger, all these guys. Because I want my guy to have a better argument. Sure, there's always going to be arguments to the other side, but I want my guy's argument to be the best. And that's not hating, because I say it point blank. When Breeze got screwed a couple of those playoff games lately, I was like, good. Favre, that happened to Favre too. Favre had a 4th and 26. Favre had a Jerry Rice fumble. Favre had a couple other plays. He had 2-3 games that were his, and it got stolen from him outside of anything that he did. And I was like, you know what? Fair is fair. A lot of these guys, Rodgers had, unlucky bouts in the playoffs. Wilson's had a couple. He's had some lucky ones too, and lucky and unlucky with Russell. Kind of crazy playoff career. Peyton's had some very unlucky ones where he played great and circumstances didn't work out. Rodgers for sure, Favre, Breeze, and all that misfortune all went to Brady, who, except when he played Eli, always seemed to be on the right side of the lucky plays. Sidebar, that's something else that makes people crazy. Tom Brady is the greatest and the most fortunate football player of all time. It's all there. So I think it's okay. If you want to root against people, own it. If you want to root for a player and root against other players that are at the same position, own it. It's cool. Admit why you're doing it. But don't let it cloud how you see that player's performance. That's admitting and owning your biases. Number 2, the video and game film, both in the regular seasons and the playoffs. What do I mean by that? Well, what'd you see on tape? Basketball, football, baseball, whatever it is. How did this guy do against a variety of competition? What were his skill sets? You talk about a quarterback, his arm strength, his mobility, his reads, his clutchness. There's a lot of ways to interpret football. Basketball, baseball, more cut and dry. How did Michael Jordan do in the finals? How did Kobe do in the finals? How did, Jordan put up 30 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists per game against the Pistons, the bad boy Pistons who stopped him? What'd you see on the film? Well, you saw a whole bunch of people trying to stop one guy, and they won the games, but they didn't really stop him. You watch everything that's in front of you and you judge it. You look at, one thing that I talk about a lot is Chris Paul and Isaiah Thomas. Watch the video and game film, and you'll see what Isaiah does better, but you'll see all the things that Chris Paul does better. And you just watch it, and you let that judge for you. Peyton Manning, great player, not in my top 5 quarterbacks, barely in my top 10. Why? Because the video and the game film in the playoffs against the best teams were not good. They were not good. He has limited arm strength, both in terms of how far he can throw it and versus how fast he can throw it, especially in inclement weather. And I'm comparing this, relatively speaking, to the best quarterbacks ever, of course. And limited mobility compared to a guy like Brett Favre, compared to John Elway, compared to, these other guys. So that's really, 1,000 other examples. But, what did you do in the biggest games or the consistent level? If we just watched all their games, we watched 5 games of each guy each year, what would happen? Number 3, your impact on winning and your intangibles. Certain guys, they go everywhere and they win. Certain guys, they don't. Steve Nash just had an impact on winning that went beyond statistics. That's why he would lead the league in offensive rating so many years, even with the Mavs and the Suns. Yeah, so maybe he was only producing, 16 and 11 or something, but he was hitting hockey assists. He was getting guys the right shots. He was pushing the pace. Jason Kidd, same type of thing. Like some guys just have a better impact on winning, and everywhere they go, they seem to win. Whereas there's guys like, let's just say Kyrie Irving or Anthony Davis, where it's like these guys are amazingly talented, but are they really leaders of men on both ends of the court? No. Certain quarterbacks, anywhere they go, they win 9, 10, 11 games every year, like clockwork. We're not talking about Aaron Rodgers. 4 MVPs now? All-time great numbers? What's his deficiency? Why has he only made 1 Super Bowl? Because a lot of times he doesn't take big risks in big games. That's just objectively what it is. He's not great at coming back when he's down because he's not an ultimate leader. He's not that guy who's going to bring his team, who's going to keep talking up his whole team when they're down by 10, 15, 20 points. Like Tom Brady, Brett Favre, Patrick Mahomes, Russell Wilson, hell, even Andrew Luck. Peyton Manning got really good at that too. Coming back from big deficits, it matters. You got to be that kind of leader, and Rodgers is the ultimate front runner. Again, still great when it's clutch. When he's down 3, 5, all he needs is to go down there and do it. He can do it, but he's got to come back more, and he's got to rely on the rest of the team. That's when that real leadership is tested. Bonus points here if you change the game. Who's changed the game? Steph Curry in the NBA. Wilt Chamberlain. Michael, to some degree, Michael Jordan. If you have that kind of impact on the sport itself, that needs to matter too. Number 4, numbers, the right ones. So, perfect example, triple doubles. Come on now. It's like, would you rather have, 17, 11, and 10 or 35, 9, and 8? You could do whatever you want with arbitrary round numbers, but we need to remember the right numbers. And that includes, your impact on both ends of the court, if it's a basketball, baseball type of ordeal. Football, what's better? Just brings you back to Russell Wilson when they called him a game manager midway through his 3rd season. He had a game where he was like, I'm just throwing numbers out there, but it's something like 15 for 22 for 250 with a couple of touchdowns. And it's always a game manager. So 15 for 22 for 250, or would you rather be, 25 of 37 for 250? Well, it looks better, right? Because it's like, more volume, or 25 of 37 for 280. It looks like he was carrying a team more, but no, the first 15 to 22 for 250, he didn't need to throw it that extra 15 times. He just did it efficiently. 11 yards to throw versus 7 or 8. No, he just did it more efficiently, like Steph Curry on a hot day. Like what? You're going to tell me a guy like Russell Westbrook shooting twice as many shots, getting the same amount of points, and that's as good as Steph Curry? Like it doesn't work like that. And I think sometimes we're so used to seeing numbers a certain way, and that's why there was a lot of kind of like condescension about the Warriors before they started winning. efficiency matters. Efficiency just means, hey, you're doing it better, and usually it implies slightly less often. Well, you're better off doing something much better, slightly less, than doing something worse more times, even if you get your volume numbers up. And, we think about shooting in basketball. When I think about numbers in basketball, there's a lot of different metrics and formulas, but I'm just about the numbers themselves, like true shooting. It's a real thing. And I look at it like this, like, hey, there's 6 realms. There's your 2-point percentage and what percentage of your shots were twos. Your 3-point percentage, what percent of your shots were threes. Your free throw percentage, what percent of your shots were free throws. How often did you get to the line? That matters. That's the difference between Larry Bird and LeBron James. You could just throw out shooting numbers and be like, oh, Bird's better. But then you realize, like, oh, Bird was in an era where he didn't shoot as many threes. That would have changed if he played today, believe me. And LeBron got to the line almost twice as much per game for his peak period. And that's why LeBron, despite not being as good a shooter as Bird, scored more efficiently. So it's about looking at the numbers and, filtering out the ones you don't need, using the ones that you should. Number 5, longevity and durability. How, I would say anywhere from Anthony Davis to LeBron James, with Chris Paul in between. So LeBron's got incredible longevity in terms of years in the league. He's going to be around number 20 by now. And, he's probably going to end up playing 20 years, which it's insane. And he hardly ever gets hurt. And you got Anthony Davis, unless he turns it around, very low amount of years where he's peaking. And he gets hurt in seasons. And you got Chris Paul, for instance, right in the middle. Super longevity in terms of career, year, 17 now. But severe durability issues because he seems to get hurt the worst times every year. So those are just 3 examples, but, Brett Favre in football, even Peyton Manning, a lot of the best quarterbacks ever, they were able to find ways to stay in there and play. Whereas guys like, right or wrong, Joe Montana, Steve Young, Troy Aikman. Again, some of this is era related. A little more rock'em sock'em back in the day. But it does factor in. Hey, one guy played 10, 12, 13 years. Another guy played 20. Well, that's a great tiebreaker. Number 6, your consistency and your peak value. So, I think of, Larry Bird, 3 straight MVPs, won 3 finals, made a couple more, and had a relatively short career because of his back injury that he hurt, apparently paving his mother's driveway. Larry Bird's peak value, in my opinion, is top 5 all time. Michael, LeBron, and then it's really a toss-up between Bird and Kareem and Russell. His peak value was higher than Magic's, in my book. Higher than everybody else's. Kobe, because Bird was just a better passer. Better shooter than Kobe. Kobe was a better scorer, but Bird he missed too many shots. Bird didn't. Curry can't get the shots off that Bird can. Curry does some things better, but I'm taking Bird. I'm taking Bird over KD. I'm taking Bird over Shaq, all these guys. But you start looking at full careers, well, it's kind of hard to pick Bird over Kobe when Bird played, 5 less seasons, 6 less seasons. It does matter. So, and your ceiling versus your floor, well, perfect example would be a guy like Kyrie. It's like in the 2016 finals, he's got games where he's, 7 for 22, inefficient on offense, and guys are scoring on him at will on defense. He's a negative, obviously a net negative. Talking about the video. What does the video show you? Oh, that Kyrie dude's getting eaten up. He's not scoring well. But then his ceiling is super high, puts up 41. Him and LeBron both score 40 points, and he has a big shot, the legendary shot, 92-89 against the Warriors. Beat the 73-win Warriors, but a shot over Steph. So his ceiling is so high, but his floor is low. So, what would you rather have? Would you rather have a guy who has that incredibly high ceiling with the bad floor, or would you rather a guy just underneath that ceiling who kind of stays there? Number 7, your big game performances. Regular season and the playoffs. How clutch are you? Now, that could be fourth quarter comebacks in football. That could be, Super Bowl performances, but you need to have big games to get to the Super Bowl in football. All playoff games are important. Divisional round, games in week 16 are super important. Basketball, closeout games, game 4s, game 5s of series as well. There's always big time games and fourth quarter statistics. There's so many different stats and stuff, but some guys have it, some guys don't. I think of Kobe, in my opinion, is overrated in terms of his clutchness. Leslie wouldn't like that, but, stats bear that out. He made so many incredible shots late in games because he was so willing to take them. So it was the ones that he made and the fact that he had this amazing bulldog attitude to take them that gave him that reputation, and it was earned. However, the statistics did not bear that out. He did not have great numbers in the clutch. That's because he took too many of them. He went all Brett Favre. And Brett Favre got this reputation toward the end of his career as being unclutch, but now he was actually just like Kobe. He was really clutch. But his screw-ups they were huge screw-ups. In football, in basketball, when you screw up, you just miss a shot. Football, when you screw up, those are picks. Those are giving the other team the ball with a chance to win the game. So, a lot of times, those are just two examples, but, big game performances. How are you when the spotlight is on? Both ends of the ball, mentally. It's one of the edges that, you give someone like Bill Russell and Larry Bird, Joe Montana, Tom Brady. These guys mentally are so strong. Now, so that's really, again, I kind of grouped those 6 together. Game film, the impact on winning, and intangibles, the numbers, longevity, consistency, clutchness. Now we get to accomplishments. Number 8, accomplishments and awards from all angles. Drew Brees never won an MVP. Brett Favre won 3 in a row. Russell Wilson's never had an MVP vote. Peyton Manning won 5 MVPs in 10 years. They're all in the same class of quarterback. I don't give a shit if you agree with that. It's true. And that just shows circumstance. It's based on who's voting, when they're voting, what other people had that year in the league. And there are guys like Kyrie Irving, like Anthony Davis, that won as a second banana to LeBron James, who's, in my opinion, the second best player of all time. Those guys are not top 50 all-time players, but they are treated like by some people because of their talent and their ceiling. And some of their big game performances, they're treated like that. So they have these, what I call bling privilege. It's like, oh, you got this accomplishment. You got this ring. The 2008 Celtics, I've never seen a team milk one title more than them. Like Paul Pierce said he was the best player in the world after he beat Kobe. It's like, dude, you guarded Kobe pretty well. You also have, KG, the best defender in the league at that point, arguably, maybe him and Duncan. Kendrick Perkins, Leon Poe, bunch of other guys, PJ Brown. You had all these trees behind you to help you. But, I'm better than Kobe. You're not better than Kobe, dude. You're on a better team. And, then you got guys like James Harden. Amazing player. One of the best combinations of shooting and passing I've ever seen. But, he won one MVP. Thought he had a right to run the whole Rockets franchise. And what did he do? He ran him into the ground. Made him trade him away. You got guys who've won that MVP like Cam Newton, Russell Westbrook. Again, that's that peak value or that ceiling, that 1 year ceiling. But Russell Westbrook's not a top 10 point guard of all time. He doesn't sniff it in my book. Can't shoot. Poor decision maker. Irresponsible defender. Amazing mentality, amazing, force he puts on the defense. But he's not overcoming those three deficiencies. He's not. Cam Newton, he was the MVP that year. Other than that, not accurate enough. Sore loser, not a good winner. Sensitive. Very similar to Russell Westbrook, honestly. It's the accuracy thing. Talent can't outdo accuracy. And I just think sometimes now there's a difference. Like, if you're going to see the Warriors in a playoff series and they're playing the Celtics or they're playing, a team that the Mavericks, let's say, that haven't won, you want to give them that bling privilege. They earned it. Like, that's experience. That's a team that's battle tested. That's different. But you talk about just players and certain guys who think their shit don't stink just because they got one award or one ring. Glenn Rivers, another perfect example. Pete Carroll, perfect example. Mike McCarthy even. These are coaches that keep underperforming, but they keep getting more chances over decades of time because they won that one championship. Meanwhile, Pete Carroll should have won 3 or 4. He didn't acquit himself like an all-time great coach. Glenn Rivers should have won 2 or 3 with the Celtics. He didn't do a good job with the Clippers as a coach or a GM. Hasn't done a good job since. And, that's the kind of overall realm that I like to talk about accomplishments and awards in, because accomplishments are voted on, like even all defensive teams. Kobe was started getting some toward the end of his career where it's like, come on now. Like, I watched Kobe play this year, and I was rooting for him at that point because I really appreciated him in his old age, gunning like he was. And I'm like, this guy ain't playing any defense. And on this topic, because I can't help myself, Isaiah Thomas. He's still arguing about his legacy 30 years later because he didn't make the dream team and because he feels like he's left out of these conversations. Meanwhile, people just rattle off, Magic Larry Isaiah, like as if he was in their league. Magic's got 3 MVPs. Bird won 3 in a row. Jordan won 5 or 6. Should have won more. Yeah, he won 5. He should have won 8 or 9. And Isaiah had one amazing season where he averaged 21 and 14, and he was 5th in the MVP voting. Maybe if he played today, he would have grabbed 1 or finished, in the top 5 more than one time. But Isaiah was not in that tier of players. But he still feels the need to defend himself and act like he single-handedly beat Michael Jordan. Well, he didn't. Jordan's numbers were far superior. I've said it before, I'll say it again. 22 games in the playoffs, they played against each other. Jordan, 37-6, 48% shooting. Isaiah, 19, 8 and 5, 40% shooting. It's not close. Bird was a far superior player. But they're not taking anything away from Isaiah. He had intangibles. He was a great leader. But he thinks he can speak from this mountaintop like he's on that level. And you still got people in the media, these sycophants, put him in the top 20 all time. It's comical. It's comical. You would not draft Isaiah Thomas as one of the top 25 players of all time. You just wouldn't do it. Just too many great players. Go ahead. You take Isaiah, I'll take Giannis. Have fun. I'll take KD. I'll take Barkley. Like, that's the thing. And these people, because they won and some of these other guys didn't, or they didn't win twice. They didn't beat Magic and Michael and Larry. Meanwhile, Pistons first ship, Magic was hurt with a hamstring injury in game 1. Maybe they would have won anyway, but hey. Celtics got old, right? Oh, no, they didn't get old? Well, didn't the Pistons get old against the Bulls? Wasn't that the story, Isaiah? You got old, right? That's what you said. So the Celtics didn't get old. You got old. Oh, wait, you were old at 29. Wait, what? You were old at 30? But you're an all-time great player. Well, why'd you get old at 30? Oh, I was tired from all those runs. Hypocrisy, man. So accomplishments and awards, it's like, some guys finish with, 5 MVPs. And like Jordan should have won 8. But that's an exception. Some guys get 0 MVPs and they had an argument for 2 or 3. Some guys like Nash got 2 and they probably should have only had 0 or 1. That's just how it goes. It's based on who's voting and what other people had and what the narrative that year is. Number 9, let's talk about context. Your team, your organization, your opponents, your era. How many chances did you have to win the title? Kobe, for instance, I think had 8, 9 chances. Other guys, Charles Barkley, 2 or 3, legitimately. Chris Paul, legitimately 2 or 3. And, what team were you on? How is your organization? How did they draft? Michael Jordan was very fortunate. He had that beef with Jerry Krause, but hey, they both combined. Jordan was always there, played almost every game. Krause built a great team around him. Phil Jackson, great coach, knew how to handle everything. All flows together. Who are their opponents? NBA players in the last, especially in the 90s, 2000s. Now it's about evening out, but still, the Western Conference has been brutal. Brutal. I watched Jason Kidd, who I love watching, and he was a great player, but, I watched him drag 2 Nets teams to the finals. Allen Iverson had Dikembe Mutombo and some real good defensive pieces on that team. Same thing with Kidd. He had a lot of great defensive players, but they were in an Eastern Conference where they were facing teams in the second round that were not as good as teams in the West were facing in the first round. You can't convince me that LeBron makes 8 straight finals in the West. You can't convince me that Jason Kidd drags those Nets teams to 2 straight finals in the West. You can't convince me that, Chris Paul, for instance, if he was in the East his whole career, wouldn't have easily made some conference finals, probably a couple finals when he didn't get hurt. Nash would have made a finals. Maybe 1. So that's kind of the, who are you playing and what era you're in. I mean, era is just, we talk about football statistics. Listen, there's always, early on, let's talk about quarterbacks. In the 50s and 60s, they only threw the ball, they threw it deep. So therefore, they had a lot of yards per attempt and a lot of touchdowns per attempt. Then it kind of flipped. Then they became a very defensive-oriented game. Quarterbacks did not have good numbers. They'd have as many interceptions as touchdowns, if not more. And then by 1978, I believe they had the Mel Blount rule, where he was on a steel curtain, and they basically stopped defenders from harassing pass catchers. And Terry Bradshaw stepped up and led the league in touchdowns, I believe. Now he gets maligned by today's generation, but dude won 4 Super Bowls. Numbers weren't great, but he was clutch. Made the plays, and hey, when they had that rule, it impacted him as well from his own teammate. And then, the 80s, again, you had Dan Marino with an insane 1984 season. Montana had some efficient numbers, but ultimately, it was still a system game, and, quarterbacks obviously mattered. Obviously, but not quite as much as they do today because of the rules. And then we started getting a little bit lax, and then I believe it was, Bill Polian and Peyton Manning against the Patriots. They kind of did some complaining in the early 2000s. I think it was around 2003, 2004, when they couldn't get over the hump with the Patriots. And, the rules changed, and now they've continued to change. Roughing the passer's out of hand. I get why. It's a money thing. But the bottom line is it's a lot easier to have great numbers now than it was 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago as a quarterback, as a receiver. So in basketball, what about the 1960s? Oscar Robertson averaged a triple-double for a 5-year stretch. Hell, he averaged 29, 10, and 9 for a 10-year stretch. But there were more possessions per game. It was a run-and-gun era. So if you take like LeBron, or you put Dwayne Wade even back then, Kevin Durant, hell, he might have had 10 assists, 10 boards some years. So it depends. Depends what era that you're playing in. In the 90s, you put everyone in the 90s in basketball, and the Knicks and Pistons and who am I forgetting? The Heat, rock'em sock'em basketball, guys may not be scoring as much. You take Michael Jordan, you put him in the 60s or now, oh man, like the run and gun stuff, oh, forget it. There'd be no stopping him. That dude would play against the best defenses in the league and score, 40 per night against the freaking Knicks. Top 5 defense in a rough era. So, context in terms of who you're playing, when you're playing, and who you're surrounded by is vital. And lastly is the realm, okay? We're talking one game, one series, one full year, your 3-year peak, 5-year, 10-year, 15, 20. Larry Bird, I'm taking him in a 5-year peak over everyone who's ever lived other than Michael Jordan, LeBron James, maybe Kareem and Russell. I'm taking him over Tim Duncan. But you talk about 15 years, 20 years, I got to take Tim Duncan. I got to take Kareem. I got to take Kobe even. Because he just simply didn't play. So that factors in. Hey, even 15-year prime, I'm still taking Jordan over LeBron, but 20 years? At this point, with the way LeBron's going, he just averaged 30 last year. You never know. So, and then you think about football. I'll bring it back to Brett Favre. Like, who do I want? One game, winner take all. Do I want Brett Favre, or do I want my guy Russell Wilson? I don't want Russell. They both have very high highs. Favre's might actually be a tiny bit higher so far, especially in the playoffs. But I know Wilson's not going to lose the game for me. He might throw a big pick here or there. We know that. But Favre is definitely way more likely to do it. Who am I taking? Brett Favre or Peyton Manning in a big game? Well, the answer may surprise you, because Peyton Manning didn't have the ceiling that Brett Favre did. Against the best defenses that Peyton faced, he didn't do well. He had 20 years to have a good Super Bowl run. He never did it. Never had a dominant Super Bowl run. His 2 Super Bowl runs, he was subpar at best. 3 touchdowns, 7 picks. In his first one. Next one, he was a caretaker, made some nice audibles, nice adjustments, but the defense carried the 2015 Broncos. So, who would I take in a situation like that? Well, I'd want Joe Montana, Tom Brady would be my go-to. For instance, you think about baseball. Baseball's not, I haven't brought that up much, but, certain guys in big spots were clutch. Derek Jeter always seemed to be in the middle of something. His numbers may not have been great, but he just had this intangible. He just had this, you won him up at the game on the line. Ken Griffey Jr. was low-key clutch. Like certain guys, they just get a reputation and you want them up in that one game, that one series. At the end of the day, it's very tough and ultimately very trivial to compare players the way we do it in our culture. But it has its place. And I think by, admitting your biases, looking at the film, figuring out the impact on winning and intangibles, numbers, longevity, durability, consistency, big games, awards, context, and realm, you got a court case. You have data on both sides. Got an impartial jury, equal lawyers. Sometimes there's no right answer, but you got your arguments. You break it down that way, there'll be less to debate. People always want to talk about, they want to simplify stuff. They want to make it like, oh, this guy had this many of this and this many of that, and that's it. It's like, no, let's talk about the game. Talk about everything that went into it. That's what I'm about with the 10 sports commandments. That applies to sports, that applies to life. On that note, my name is Michael Stephen. Hope you have a great night. Peace out.